The cold metal of the tank hatch pressed against Lafayette Pool's gloved hands as he stood exposed in the commander's spot, his eyes searching through the darkness before dawn for the tree that lay somewhere ahead. That morning in Münsterbusch, Germany, on September 19th, 1944, his commanding officers had given him clear instructions that seemed almost protective in nature. They told him not to take the lead position that day, to keep his tank on the side, to stay as safe as possible because he and his crew would soon be heading back to America for a tour selling war bonds. Standing there in that turret, just 6 miles from Aachen with the Siegfried Line's concrete barriers now behind them, Pool knew something that nearly 3 months of fighting had burned deep into his mind. There was no such thing as safety in war. It was nothing but an illusion. The Sherman tank that carried him bore the words "in the mood" painted in white block letters across its hull. This marked the 3rd time those particular words had decorated American steel under his leadership. 2 previous tanks carrying that same name had already been destroyed. In less than an hour, this 3rd one would join them in a moment that would bring to an end the most devastating tank-killing streak any American commander had ever achieved. The morning air carried familiar smells, diesel exhaust mixing with the burnt gunpowder left over from yesterday's battles. Pool could hear the rumbling of other Sherman tanks getting into position around him, the clanking sound of their treads moving across cobblestones, the quiet voices of other tank commanders checking in with each other over their radios. Hidden somewhere up ahead in the buildings and rubble that made up Münsterbusch, German defenders sat waiting with their 88mm guns and Panzerfaust rockets ready. Pool had faced these weapons many times over the past months. He had learned to respect them, even fear them, but he never let that fear stop him from doing what needed to be done. Everything about how he fought in a tank rested on one simple idea: hit first, hit hard, close the distance before the enemy could use their better weapons against you. That aggressive approach had kept him alive through 21 major attacks, through the destruction of 2 tanks, through countless close calls where German rounds had missed him by just inches or bounced off his armor without breaking through. But on this particular morning, with home and safety just days away, Pool's luck was about to run out. On June 14th, 1941, at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, enlistment papers carried the signature of a 21-year-old farm boy from Odem, Texas, who had left his engineering studies at Texas College of Arts and Industries to serve his nation. Lafayette Green Pool stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a lanky frame built from years of working the dry South Texas soil, his hands already tough from rope and plow before they would learn how to control a 33-ton Sherman tank. He had been born just 5 minutes after his twin brother John Thomas on July 23, 1919, in the small farming community of Odem, though he grew up on a farm near the neighboring town of Sinton. Both towns sat in the coastal plains of South Texas, where summer heat climbed over 100 degrees and rain stayed scarce. Life on a Texas farm in the 1920s meant hard physical work from when the sun came up until it went down again, working with cattle, fixing fences, repairing equipment with whatever materials you could find or make work. Electricity remained something few rural families could afford. Running water came from wells that had to be pumped by hand. Entertainment consisted of radio programs when you could afford batteries and community gatherings at church on Sundays. Pool and his twin brother John Thomas were close despite having different personalities. John Thomas would eventually join the Navy and serve throughout the war on ships in the Pacific. Their sister Tenny May completed the Pool family. Their father John McKinley Pool and mother Marion Lee Ruth Pool taught their children the importance of hard work, discipline, and service to others. Young Lafayette, who went by the nickname Leaf among family and friends, showed exceptional ability in sports and school from an early age. He attended Taft High School and graduated in 1937, where he played football as a star player whose speed and competitive spirit made him stand out on the field. But Pool's talents went beyond sports. He had a sharp mind and fierce determination to do well in his studies. After finishing at Taft High School in 1937, Pool enrolled at Corpus Christi College Academy, an all-boys Catholic preparatory school known for tough academic standards. Pool did well in this challenging place, bringing the same intensity he showed in football and farm work to his studies. He graduated as class valedictorian in 1938, an achievement that opened doors for his future education. Poole then enrolled at Texas College of Arts and Industries in Kingsville, now known as Texas A&M University Kingsville, where he studied engineering. His skill with mathematics and mechanical systems suggested he could have a good career in engineering, but Poole's education would be interrupted by world events he couldn't control. During his time in school, Poole also took up boxing, competing in the 165-pound weight class. Boxing suited him perfectly. The sport demanded aggression, quick reflexes, smart thinking, and the mental strength to take punishment while continuing to fight. Poole proved exceptionally skilled in the ring, putting together an impressive amateur record of 41 wins with no defeats. His aggressive style and powerful punches earned him the Sectional Golden Gloves Championship in New Orleans, Louisiana. The National Golden Gloves organization invited him to compete in the national finals, an opportunity that could have started a professional boxing career. Poole turned it down. He had other plans. Engineering studies called to him more than the uncertain life of a professional fighter. But the discipline, aggression, and competitive spirit that boxing developed in him would serve him well in a very different kind of fight. By 1941, the world was at war. Germany had conquered most of Europe. Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Japan was expanding across Asia. The United States officially stayed neutral, but everyone understood that American entry into the fight was only a matter of time. Young men across America faced a choice: wait to be drafted or enlist and have some say in which branch of service they would join. Poole made his decision. On June 14, 1941, exactly 6 months before Pearl Harbor would force America into the war, Lafayette Poole walked into the recruitment office at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio and enlisted in the United States Army. He was 21 years old, stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighed approximately 175 pounds, and had the physical conditioning of an athlete combined with the mental discipline of a scholar. The Army would transform him into something else entirely: a tank commander who would become the deadliest in American military history. The newly forming 3rd Armored Division at Camp Beauregard, Louisiana, became Poole's introduction to mechanized warfare. The division had been activated on April 15, 1941, just 2 months before Poole's enlistment, as part of America's massive military buildup in anticipation of war. The 3rd Armored Division would earn the nickname Spearhead for its role in breaking through German defenses across France and into Germany itself, always leading the advance, always pushing deeper into enemy territory than any other unit. Poole was assigned to I Company, 3rd Battalion, 32nd Armored Regiment, where he would serve as a tank commander in the 3rd Platoon. This assignment would define his life. The 3rd Armored Division represented America's commitment to mechanized warfare, a relatively new concept that had proven devastatingly effective when Germany used it during their conquest of Poland and France. The division's structure reflected lessons learned from watching German panzer operations. It combined tank battalions with armored infantry, artillery, engineers, and support units, all trained to work together as one fighting force. The division's main striking power came from its tank battalions, equipped initially with the M3 Lee medium tank, a temporary design with a 75mm gun mounted in a hull sponson and a 37mm gun in a turret. The M3 Lee was outdated before it even entered service, but American tank production in 1941 couldn't yet deliver better designs in large enough numbers. The M4 Sherman, which would become the standard American medium tank for the rest of the war, was just entering production when Poole joined the Army. Training at Camp Beauregard proved intense and demanding. Poole and his fellow tankers learned to operate, maintain, and fight from armored vehicles under every possible condition. They practiced gunnery until they could spot targets and engage them in seconds. They learned radio procedures for coordinating with other tanks, infantry, and artillery. They studied German tactics and equipment, learning about the capabilities and weak points of the panzers they would eventually face in combat. They conducted endless field exercises, practicing attacks, defenses, and pursuit operations. The Louisiana countryside became their classroom, its forests and swamps providing terrain that resembled the European battlefields where they would eventually fight. Poole's natural aggression, tactical instincts, and fierce competitive drive marked him immediately as exceptional. Officers noticed his intensity during training exercises, his unwillingness to accept second place in anything. During gunnery practice, Poole's tank consistently scored among the highest in the battalion. During tactical exercises, Poole showed an instinctive understanding of terrain and enemy positions that went beyond what could be taught in classrooms. He studied everything about tanks, how they moved, how they fought, where their weak points were. He learned to read terrain like a book, spotting positions that offered advantages in fields of fire, concealment, and routes for advancing or withdrawing. Most importantly, Poole showed leadership. The men under his command respected him, trusted him, would follow him anywhere. That trust would be earned again and again in combat. Poole demanded perfection from himself and his men, pushing them through endless gunnery drills, driving practice, and tactical exercises. He wasn't cruel or arbitrary in what he demanded. He simply understood that in combat, the difference between a well-trained crew and an average one was the difference between life and death. Every second saved in finding a target meant firing first. Every round that hit meant one less enemy tank shooting back. Every correct radio call meant better coordination and support. Poole drilled these lessons into his crew until their actions became instinctive. Load, aim, fire, reload became a rhythm as natural as breathing. Identify target, judge range, adjust fire became second nature. The crew would need every bit of that training when they finally entered combat. When the chance came to receive a commission as an officer, Poole refused. Commissioned officers commanded from battalion or company level, coordinating multiple tanks and supporting units from command posts. Poole wanted to fight from a tank, to lead from the front where he could see the enemy and make quick tactical decisions. He preferred to stay close to his crew, close to the fight. That decision would prove defining. Staff sergeants didn't normally command platoons in combat, but Poole's exceptional skills and aggressive leadership would see him leading multiple tanks in attack after attack, trusted by his superiors to accomplish missions that would normally fall to lieutenants or captains. Training continued through 1942 and into 1943, expanding beyond Camp Beauregard to other locations. The 3rd Armored Division deployed to the Desert Training Center in the Mojave Desert of California and Arizona, where the vast open spaces and harsh conditions provided excellent preparation for potential combat in North Africa. The desert exercises tested men and machines under extreme heat, choking dust, and terrain that offered no concealment. Tank commanders learned to navigate by dead reckoning across featureless wastes. Crews learned to maintain their vehicles under conditions that caused metal to expand, seals to fail, and systems to overheat. The lessons learned in the desert would prove valuable, though the 3rd Armored Division would fight in Europe rather than Africa. After desert training, the division moved to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, for final preparation before going overseas. The rolling hills and forests of Pennsylvania more closely resembled European terrain than either Louisiana swamps or California deserts. Here the division practiced the combined arms tactics that would prove decisive in France and Germany. Tanks advanced with infantry support, protected by artillery fire, with engineers ready to break through obstacles and clear minefields. Radio discipline improved. Maintenance procedures were refined. Weak points in organization and tactics were identified and corrected. By late 1943, the 3rd Armored Division was as ready for combat as training could make it. During these years of training, Poole experienced important events in his personal life. He married Evelyn Wright while on leave in December 1942, a brief moment of normalcy and happiness before he would leave for the war that would define his generation. Evelyn would wait for him throughout the war, writing letters that kept Poole going through the darkest moments of combat, raising a family that would eventually include 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. The marriage would last until Poole's death nearly 50 years later, proof of the strength of the bond they formed during those brief moments together before Poole left for England. In September 1943, Poole and the 32nd Armored Regiment boarded troop ships in New York Harbor, crossing the Atlantic to stage in England. The crossing took approximately 2 weeks, with thousands of soldiers packed into converted passenger liners and cargo ships, sleeping in cramped quarters, enduring rough seas and the constant fear of German U-boats. The convoys zigzagged across the Atlantic to avoid submarine wolf packs, protected by destroyer escorts that patrolled the edges, dropping depth charges whenever sonar contacts suggested possible submarines. Poole and his fellow tankers arrived safely in Liverpool in late September 1943. The 3rd Armored Division would spend 9 months in England from September 1943 to June 1944, continuing training and preparing for the cross-channel invasion that everyone knew was coming. The division staged near Liverpool and Bristol in Somerset, conducting exercises across the English countryside, learning to work with British units, and receiving the final equipment and replacements that would bring the division to full strength. The waiting proved difficult. Everyone knew that invasion and combat were coming soon, but no one knew exactly when or where. Rumors spread constantly. Security was tight. Training continued. During this time, Poole experienced his first and only defeat in combat sports. Joe Louis, the heavyweight boxing champion known as the Brown Bomber, toured England in July 1944, putting on exhibition matches for the troops. Louis was arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, a cultural icon whose victories in the ring had become symbols of American strength and determination. His second victory over German boxer Max Schmeling in 1938 had taken on enormous political significance as a rejection of Nazi racial theories. Now Louis used his fame to boost troop morale, sparring with servicemen in friendly exhibition bouts. Soldiers wanted to step into the ring with the heavyweight champion of the world, but Poole, always confident, always competitive, volunteered for an exhibition match. The bout was scheduled for July 4th, 1944, Independence Day, in Liverpool. It was meant to be a friendly exhibition, light sparring to entertain the troops. Poole had other ideas. His competitive nature and boxer's instincts took over. He went after Louis aggressively, landing several solid blows that caught the champion by surprise. Louis responded by putting his arm around Poole and saying quietly, "White man, I'm going to teach you a big lesson." The lesson came quickly and thoroughly. Louis proceeded to give Poole a boxing lesson, using his superior speed, power, and technique to dominate the young sergeant without actually hurting him. Louis could have knocked Poole out at any time, but chose instead to show the vast difference between amateur and professional boxing. Poole would later admit that Joe Louis turned him every which way but loose during that exhibition. But Poole walked away with something more valuable than victory. He learned that even overwhelming power and superior physical gifts could be overcome with the right tactics, the right moment, the right shot. He learned that aggression alone wasn't enough. Skill, timing, and tactical intelligence mattered. Those lessons would serve him well in the battles ahead. On June 23, 1944, at the port of Weymouth, England, the 3rd Armored Division began boarding ships for the crossing to Normandy. The D-Day invasion had occurred on June 6, 18 days earlier. Allied forces had secured the beachhead and were pushing inland against fierce German resistance. Now follow-on units like the 3rd Armored Division would cross the channel to join the battle. The division's tanks and vehicles had been carefully waterproofed for the amphibious landing, with protective covers and seals over every opening to keep seawater from flooding engines and compartments during the wade from landing craft to shore. The preparation was thorough, but the men remained nervous. Everyone had heard stories about the chaos of D-Day, the casualties on Omaha Beach, the desperate fighting in the hedgerows. Now was their turn. On June 24, 1944, at Omaha Beach, Normandy, France, the 3rd Armored Division came ashore 18 days after D-Day in a steady rain that turned the beach into a muddy chaos of men, vehicles, and equipment being processed through crowded assembly areas. The beach still carried the scars of the invasion. Wrecked landing craft lay half-submerged in the surf. Destroyed German fortifications dotted the cliffs. Vast supply dumps of ammunition, fuel, rations, and equipment covered every available space. Military police directed traffic, trying to maintain order as thousands of vehicles moved inland toward assembly areas. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel exhaust, wet earth, and a lingering odor of explosives. Pool's first Sherman, an M4A1 with a 75mm main gun, came ashore without incident. The waterproofing held, the engine started, and the tank ground up the beach under its own power. Over the next several days, the division assembled in designated areas, removed waterproofing, test-fired weapons, performed maintenance, and prepared for combat. Pool's crew had trained together for months, developing the kind of synchronized precision that meant the difference between life and death in combat. Now, they would discover whether that training was enough for the reality of battle. Pool personally selected each member of his crew, choosing men whose skills and temperament complemented each other and matched his own aggressive approach to combat. Corporal Wilbert Richards, called Baby because of his baby-faced appearance despite being 24 years old, served as driver. Richards stood only 5 feet 4 inches tall, compact and wiry, but he had exceptional skill at maneuvering the Sherman. Pool bragged that Baby could parallel park the 33-ton Sherman in downtown New York rush hour traffic, an exaggeration that contained essential truth. Richards could thread the big tank through narrow village streets, reverse its speed while under fire, and position the Sherman for the best firing angles with a precision that exceeded most drivers. Richards drove with his hatch open whenever possible, having once been trapped inside a tank when a hatch jammed during training. That experience left him with a lifelong fear of being trapped inside a burning tank, a fear that every tanker shared, but Richards felt more strongly. The open hatch gave him better visibility and a faster escape route if the tank was hit, though it also left him more vulnerable to shell fragments and small arms fire. Private First Class Bertrand Close, just 17 years old and called schoolboy for his youth and wire-rimmed glasses, served as assistant driver and bow gunner, operating the .30 caliber Browning 1919 machine gun mounted in the front hull. Close came from Portland, Oregon, and looked like a teenager because he was one, with smooth features and a slight build that made him seem younger than his years. But appearances deceived. Close was deadly with that bow machine gun, cutting down enemy infantry with precise fire. His position in the right front of the tank gave him a good field of fire forward and to the right, covering the approaches that enemy infantry would use to get close enough to attack the tank with Panzerfausts or magnetic mines. Close was also responsible for helping with loading ammunition during intense combat, passing rounds from storage racks to the loader when speed was critical. Corporal Willis Aller, 29 years old and nicknamed Groundhog, manned the main gun. Aller came from Illinois, older than the rest of the crew, and had a calm, methodical temperament that contrasted with Pool's intensity. Aller claimed to see all of France through his gun sights, his face constantly marked by the imprint of his tanker goggles. He kept his eye pressed to the sight all the time, ready to fire at any moment. The gunner's position was perhaps the most demanding in the tank. The gunner had to spot targets quickly, judge range accurately, select the right ammunition type, aim precisely while the tank was moving, and fire at exactly the right moment. All of this had to happen in seconds, often while under enemy fire, with explosions rocking the tank and smoke blocking vision. Aller excelled at this demanding job. His perfectly placed shots would destroy German tank after German tank over the coming months, proving Pool's faith in his abilities was justified. Technician 5th grade Delbert Boggs, 22 years old from Lancaster, Ohio, and called Jailbird, served as loader. The nickname came from his background. According to crew lore, Boggs had been arrested on manslaughter charges and given a choice by the court: prison or the military. Boggs chose the Army, bringing with him a toughness and street wisdom that served him well in combat. Whether the story was entirely true or partly exaggerated, it captured something essential about Boggs's character. He was tough, resilient, and absolutely reliable under fire. The loader's job was physically demanding. A 75mm round weighed approximately 25 pounds, and the 76mm rounds they would later use weighed even more. During intense combat, the loader might handle dozens of rounds, selecting the correct ammunition type on Poole's command, loading smoothly despite the tight space and the violent motion of the tank, then immediately preparing the next round. Boggs was skinny, but had wiry strength and endurance. His speed and reliability in loading gave Poole's tank a rate of fire that exceeded most other Shermans. These 4 men, led by Poole, called themselves the Pups, and they called their commander Wardaddy, a nickname that captured both affection and respect for the man who led them into hell again and again. The nickname Wardaddy emerged during training when Poole's intense focus on combat preparation and his fatherly concern for his crew's welfare created a dynamic where he was both their leader and protector. Poole was younger than Aller and not much older than the others, but his force of personality and leadership ability made him the natural center of the crew. They trusted him completely. That trust would be tested dozens of times over the coming months. The crew had regularly outscored other division crews in gunnery efficiency during training. Their teamwork was seamless, each man knowing his role, trusting his brothers. When Poole called out a fire command, the crew responded with machine-like precision. Driver, stop. Gunner, sabo, tank front. On the way. Boom. The entire sequence from spotting a target to firing could take less than 5 seconds with a well-trained crew. Poole's crew could do it in 3. That speed would save their lives repeatedly. Poole's tactical philosophy was simple and brutal, refined through years of training and study of German armor tactics. Shoot first, shoot to kill, always go forward, never retreat. He believed in closing with the enemy, in getting to ranges where the Sherman's advantages in maneuverability, rate of fire, and crew training could overcome the German advantages in armor and firepower. German tanks like the Panther and Tiger had superior guns and thicker armor capable of destroying a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman couldn't penetrate their frontal armor. The solution was to never fight at long range. Poole closed the distance aggressively, maneuvering to get flank shots where even a Panther's armor could be penetrated, overwhelming German crews with rapid, accurate fire before they could bring their superior firepower to bear effectively. Poole was claustrophobic, preferring to ride exposed in the turret or on top of the tank rather than buttoned up inside. This was both a weakness and a strength. The weakness was obvious. Exposed in the turret, Poole was vulnerable to shell fragments, small arms fire, and the concussion from nearby explosions. Many tank commanders were killed or wounded by fire that wouldn't have penetrated the tank's armor if they had stayed buttoned up inside. But the strength was significant. Standing in the open hatch or sitting on top of the turret, Poole had vastly better visibility than commanders who fought buttoned up, seeing through periscopes and vision slits. He could spot threats earlier, identify targets faster, and maintain better awareness of what was happening around him. He saw the battlefield in 3 dimensions rather than the narrow tunnels of vision that periscopes provided. That advantage in awareness often meant the difference between shooting first or being shot first. In tank combat, shooting first usually meant survival. Poole's battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Richardson, was also a Texan, and the 2 men developed a relationship based on mutual respect and shared aggression. Richardson recognized Poole's exceptional abilities and gave him increasing responsibilities despite his rank as a staff sergeant. Richardson said Poole rode his tank like a bucking bronco, always exposed, always vulnerable, always leading from the front. That aggressive leadership style inspired Poole's crew and made him the natural choice to lead Spearhead attacks. Richardson would call on Poole again and again to take the most dangerous missions, to lead attacks into the most heavily defended positions. Poole never refused, never hesitated. He simply climbed into his tank and led the way forward. Before Poole Sherman went into combat, it needed a name. Tank crews typically painted names on their vehicles, personalizing the steel machines they lived in and depended on for survival. Poole chose In the Mood, taken from Glenn Miller's popular swing song that had been a massive hit in 1940 and remained a favorite among American servicemen. The song's upbeat tempo and infectious energy captured something about Poole's approach to combat. Aggressive, confident, unstoppable. The name would become legendary. On June 29, 1944, at Villers-Fossard, France, the 3rd Armored Division's Combat Command received orders to reduce a German salient northeast of St. Lo, a defensive position held by a reinforced Fusilier Battalion of the 353rd Infantry Division. This would be the division's first combat operation and Poole's first taste of battle. The mission was to attack a 3,000-yard deep salient that protected the town of Villers-Fossard, located just east of the Vire River and north of St. Lo. The Germans had prepared strong defensive positions, taking full advantage of the Normandy hedgerows that turned every field into a natural fortress. The hedgerows of Normandy proved one of the most significant terrain challenges American forces faced in France. Built up over centuries, the hedgerows consisted of thick earthen walls 3 to 4 feet high, crowned with dense vegetation of bushes and small trees. They lined every field and road, creating a maze of natural fortifications that channeled movement and provided perfect concealment for defensive positions. German infantry and anti-tank guns could hide behind hedgerows, invisible until attackers came within point-blank range. Tanks attempting to climb over hedgerows exposed their vulnerable belly armor to enemy fire. The first American attacks in Normandy had been costly disasters as units learned these lessons in blood. American engineers developed a solution. They cut large steel beams from the German beach obstacles that had been intended to stop the D-Day invasion and welded these beams onto the fronts of Sherman tanks, creating battering rams called Rhino tanks. These modified Shermans could smash through hedgerows at speed without climbing over them, allowing tanks to maintain their armor protection while breaking through into adjacent fields. The innovation transformed the tactical situation, giving American armor the mobility needed to operate effectively in the hedgerow country. At 0900 hours on June 29th, Combat Command launched its attack with Task Forces X and Y advancing abreast toward Villers-Fossard. Poole's platoon moved with Task Force Y on the right flank. Artillery preparation preceded the advance, with American guns pounding German positions for 30 minutes before the tanks moved forward. The bombardment filled the air with the shriek of shells and the thunder of explosions. Then came the order to advance. Poole's Sherman moved forward with other tanks of Task Force Y, grinding through the Norman countryside toward the German positions. Visibility was limited to the next hedgerow, sometimes only 50 yards away. Radio chatter filled Poole's headset as other tank commanders reported contacts, called for artillery support, coordinated their movements. The distinctive crack of German 75mm anti-tank guns echoed across the battlefield, answered by the deeper boom of American tank guns. Black smoke from burning vehicles drifted across the fields. Poole spotted German vehicles ahead through gaps in the hedgerows. Half-track, 10 o'clock, 300 yards. He gave the fire command, and Aller sent a 75mm high-explosive round downrange. The round hit the German vehicle squarely, and it exploded in flames. Poole's crew destroyed 3 German vehicles and killed over 70 enemy soldiers during that first day of combat. The violence and chaos of armored combat proved exactly what Poole had trained for, yet training could never fully prepare anyone for the reality. The noise was overwhelming. The fear was real. The adrenaline, made time, seemed to both speed up and slow down at the same time. But Poole's training took over. He moved aggressively, pushing forward, refusing to give up ground. His crew responded with discipline and precision, each man performing his role exactly as drilled during countless training exercises. Then came the moment every tank crew feared. In the mood, entered the village of La Forge, part of the Villers-Fossard combat area, advancing down a narrow street between stone buildings. The village was supposedly clear of enemy forces, but intelligence was incomplete and situations changed rapidly in combat. As the Sherman rolled down the street, a German soldier with a Panzerfaust stepped from a doorway, aimed a shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon, and fired from less than 50 yards away. The Panzerfaust was a simple but effective weapon, a shaped charge warhead on the end of a disposable launcher. It could penetrate over 200 millimeters of armor, more than enough to destroy Sherman. The rocket motor ignited with a whoosh, and the warhead streaked across the short distance, slamming into the Mood's side armor with a metallic crash that rang through the crew compartment. The shaped charge detonated against the armor, creating a jet of superheated metal that punched through into the crew compartment. The tank shuddered violently. Smoke filled the interior. Alarm sounded. Poole gave the immediate order, "Bail out." All 5 crew members scrambled from the disabled tank, moving with the practice speed that training had instilled. Poole was first out through the commander's hatch, followed by Aller. Richards and Close exited through the driver and assistant driver hatches in the front hull. Boggs squeezed through the loader's hatch. They all escaped before ammunition could cook off or fire spread through the vehicle. The crew had survived their first tank loss with no casualties, though the experience left them shaken. In the Mood, the first Sherman to bear that name, was destroyed. The crew had lasted exactly 5 days in combat. Poole and his crew rejoined Task Force Y on foot, hitching rides on other tanks until they could be assigned a replacement vehicle. The battle for Villiers-Fossard continued through June 30th. Combat Command lost 31 tanks and 12 other vehicles during the 2-day battle, a harsh introduction to the reality of armored combat in Normandy. German defensive fire was accurate and deadly. The terrain favored the defenders at every turn, but the attack succeeded. American forces seized Villiers-Fossard and held it until relieved by elements of the 29th Infantry Division. The 3rd Armored Division had passed its first test, learning valuable lessons about hedgerow fighting that would serve it well in the weeks ahead. On July 1st, 1944, somewhere in Normandy, Poole and his crew received their replacement tank, an M4A1 with a new 76mm main gun, designated M4A1 76W. Poole was the first tank commander in his regiment to receive this upgraded variant, a recognition of his performance during the Villiers-Fossard battle. The new tank represented a significant improvement in firepower. The W stood for wet stowage, a critical safety feature where ammunition racks were surrounded by containers filled with a mixture of water, ethylene glycol, and a rust inhibitor known as Amudamp. This wet stowage dramatically reduced the risk of catastrophic fire when the tank was penetrated. Early model Shermans had a terrible reputation for burning when hit, earning the nickname Ronson from German tankers after the cigarette lighter that advertised "lights first time, every time." The wet stowage system greatly improved crew survivability. The 76mm gun represented a quantum leap in armor penetration capability compared to the 75mm. While the 75mm M3 gun could only penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at ranges under 100 yards under ideal conditions, the 76mm M1 gun could penetrate Panther side armor at 2,000 yards and frontal armor at ranges up to 500 yards when using armor-piercing ammunition. Against German Mark IV tanks, the most common German medium tank, the 76mm was effective at even longer ranges. The trade-off was that the 76mm fired a less effective high-explosive round than the 75mm, making it slightly less useful against infantry and soft targets. But for Poole's aggressive close-range tank hunting tactics, the improved anti-armor capability was invaluable. Poole immediately had In the Mood painted on the new hull, maintaining the tradition. The crew climbed aboard their new ride, familiarizing themselves with the slightly different layout and controls. The 76mm gun was longer and heavier than the 75mm, changing the tank's balance slightly. The internal arrangement of ammunition storage differed. The crew needed to learn these differences to make the new tank their own. Over the next 6 weeks, Poole and his crew would write the most remarkable chapter in American tank warfare history with this vehicle. The hedgerow fighting of Normandy tested every tanker's skill and nerve. The battle rhythm was brutally simple. Advance to a hedgerow, take fire from the next hedgerow, call for artillery support, assault through the hedgerow under covering fire, clear the field of enemy infantry, advance to the next hedgerow, repeat endlessly day after day. Visibility was measured in yards. Ambushes came from every direction. German 75mm and 88mm anti-tank guns lurked behind every stone wall and hedgerow, their long barrels carefully concealed until American tanks came within killing range. German infantry with Panzerfausts infiltrated close to American positions at night, waiting for the chance to fire their shaped charge warheads into tank sides or rear armor. The casualty rate for tank crews was staggering, but Poole's tactical instincts proved exceptional. He developed a sixth sense for reading terrain, for identifying likely enemy positions before they revealed themselves. He studied the way shadows fell, the patterns of vegetation, the sight lines from different positions. He learned to recognize the telltale signs of defensive preparation, the subtle disturbances in foliage that might hide a gun position, the best firing positions that an experienced enemy would naturally choose. This ability to think like the enemy, to anticipate their actions, gave Poole a crucial edge. He spotted threats before they spotted him. He engaged first, usually destroying enemy positions before they could return effective fire. On one occasion, advancing at dusk near the town of Lamsnol-Herman, Poole was about to order his driver to stop for the night when a shape appeared in the darkness 50 feet ahead, a German 40mm anti-aircraft gun emplacement, its crew unaware of the Sherman's presence. The Germans were settling in for the night, moving around their position without the discipline of men expecting immediate contact. Poole recognized instantly that he had seconds to act before the German crew spotted his tank. Without warning, without giving away his position with orders over the radio that might be overheard, Poole simply shouted, "Gunner, fire!" The command was pure instinct, pure aggression. Allers, I was already pressed to the sight, as it always was. His hands moved instantly to the firing controls. The 76mm gun roared, sending an armor-piercing round directly at the German position. The projectile covered the short distance in a fraction of a second, striking the 40mm gun squarely. The impact destroyed the gun and killed or wounded the crew instantly. The entire engagement from Poole spotting the target to the round impacting took perhaps 3 seconds. That instant reaction, the product of hundreds of hours of training and growing combat experience, showed the crew's efficiency. They had reached the ideal state for combat soldiers, where training becomes instinct and decisions happen faster than conscious thought. Another night engagement near Colombelles, France nearly ended in disaster, but instead demonstrated Poole's tactical brilliance and his crew's exceptional skill. Poole's platoon was advancing in darkness, moving cautiously through hedgerow country where visibility was limited to a few yards. Night operations were extremely dangerous for tanks. Visibility was minimal even with the tank's crude infrared equipment. Enemy infantry could get very close under cover of darkness. Friendly fire incidents were common when units lost track of each other's positions. But the tactical situation demanded night movement, and Poole led his platoon forward. Suddenly, in the mood, almost collided with a German Panther tank. The two vehicles came around adjacent corners of a hedgerow and found themselves facing each other at a range of perhaps 30 yards. The Panther was one of the most feared armored vehicles in the Wehrmacht arsenal. It mounted a 75mm KWK-42 gun that could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at over 2,000 yards. The Panther's frontal armor was nearly impenetrable to the Sherman's 76mm gun, except at very close range. On paper, the Panther was superior to the Sherman in every measurable category, except perhaps mechanical reliability. German tankers called the Sherman a Zippo lighter, claiming they could destroy Shermans easily while American rounds bounced harmlessly off Panther armor. But combat isn't fought on paper. Poole's superior crew training and aggressive tactics negated the German technical advantages. Both commanders spotted each other at the same time. Both gave fire commands. The Panther's crew got off 2 shots in rapid succession, but the darkness, surprise, and hasty aim caused both rounds to miss. One passed over in the Mood's turret with a crack of displaced air. The other hit the ground just in front of the Sherman and ricocheted upward, missing the belly armor by inches. Aller's reply went true. A single 76mm armor-piercing round fired at point-blank range penetrated the Panther's turret ring, where the turret joined the hull, a weak point in the armor scheme. The round detonated inside the turret, igniting ammunition and killing the crew instantly. The German tank erupted in flames, lighting up the area with orange light that destroyed what remained of Poole's night vision, but also silhouetted other German vehicles in the area. Poole immediately called for his platoon to engage additional targets while backing away from the burning Panther before its ammunition exploded catastrophically. The engagement lasted perhaps 10 seconds from initial contact to the Panther burning. Poole had won a duel with a technically superior tank through superior crew work, better training, faster reactions, and more accurate shooting. News of Poole's kill spread through the battalion and then the division. American tankers feared the Panther and Tiger. Stories circulated about German supertanks that could destroy Shermans at ranges where American guns were ineffective. Crew morale suffered when facing these monsters. But Poole had proven that German tanks could be killed. Aggressive tactics, good crew drill, and accurate shooting could overcome technical inferiority. Poole's example inspired other tank commanders to fight more aggressively, to close the range where American advantages in maneuverability and rate of fire could compensate for weaker guns and thinner armor. On July 26, 1944, Operation Cobra began with one of the most concentrated bombing campaigns in military history. Over 1,500 American heavy bombers and 380 medium bombers dropped nearly 4,000 tons of bombs on German positions south of St. Lo in just a few hours. The bombardment was intended to pulverize German defenses, creating a gap through which American armor could pour into open country beyond the hedgerows. The plan worked brilliantly despite tragic friendly fire incidents that killed over 100 American soldiers, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. The German lines shattered under the bombardment. Their defensive positions ceased to exist as coherent fortifications. Surviving defenders were dazed, disorganized, and unable to mount effective resistance. The 3rd Armored Division led the exploitation, punching through the shattered German lines on July 29th and racing south into open country. After weeks of grinding hedgerow fighting where progress was measured in hundreds of yards per day, the division suddenly found itself in a war of movement. Tanks raced down roads at 20 and 30 miles per hour, covering more ground in hours than they had in weeks of previous fighting. German units bypassed and, isolated by the rapid American advance, attempted to retreat but found their escape routes cut. Thousands of Germans surrendered. Those who tried to fight found themselves overwhelmed by American firepower and mobility. Poole's tanks spearheaded attack after attack during the breakout, always in the lead, always pushing forward. The role of Spearhead tank was simultaneously an honor and a death sentence. The Spearhead tank was first to encounter enemy resistance, first to be engaged by anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust, first to hit mines or run into prepared ambushes. Casualty rates for Spearhead tanks were astronomical, but Poole volunteered for the role again and again. His crew never questioned his decisions. They trusted Wardaddy to get them through, and somehow, despite the odds, In Mood kept rolling forward, kept destroying enemy vehicles, kept surviving when other tanks were hit and burned. At Dissen, Belgium near Liège, Poole distinguished himself while acting as platoon leader during the pursuit across France into Belgium. The 3rd Armored Division had advanced so rapidly that Poole, a staff sergeant, was leading a platoon of 5 tanks because no officers were available. His column was advancing down a road when they took fire from the left flank. German half-tracks and armored cars attempting to escape the encirclement had stumbled into the American column. Poole ordered his column to continue its advance while he turned, in the mood, to deal with the threat. The crew located the German unit, perhaps a dozen vehicles attempting to move cross-country through fields and woods. Poole closed to effective range and opened fire, destroying 6 enemy vehicles in rapid succession. The German column scattered, some vehicles attempting to escape, others returning fire ineffectively. While Poole was engaged with this threat, word came over the radio that a German Panther had appeared ahead and was engaging the American column. Poole had to choose: continue mopping up the vehicles he had already engaged or race back to deal with the more serious threat of the Panther. He chose the latter. Poole ordered Richards to get back to the column at maximum speed. The Sherman raced down the road at 25 miles per hour, faster than was safe given the terrain and visibility, but Poole knew that every second counted. His column needed support immediately. As they approached the reported Panther position, Poole scanned for the German tank, while Boggs loaded armor-piercing rounds and Aller prepared to engage. Poole spotted the Panther engaging American Shermans from a hull-down position behind a slight rise. The German tank had the advantage of a prepared firing position and was methodically engaging the American column. 2 Shermans were already burning. Poole could see crew members from one tank bailing out through flames and smoke. The Panther's attention was focused forward on the American column. It was engaging. The German commander hadn't yet spotted Poole's tank approaching from the flank. Poole immediately recognized the opportunity. Never interrupt an enemy when he's making a mistake, Napoleon had advised. The Panther commander was fixated on his targets to the front, presenting his side armor to Poole's approach. Poole gave the fire command. Gunner, Sabot, Panther, left flank. Aller traversed the turret smoothly, putting the crosshairs of his sight on the Panther's side armor just below the turret ring. On the way, the 76mm gun fired, the round covering the distance in less than a second. The armor-piercing projectile struck the Panther's side armor and penetrated cleanly, detonating inside the crew compartment. The German tank shuddered. Smoke poured from its hatches, and moments later flames appeared. The crew attempted to bail out, but the internal explosion had killed or stunned them. Only 1 German crewman managed to escape before ammunition detonated catastrophically, blowing the turret off the hull. Poole had destroyed his second Panther, again through superior tactics rather than superior firepower. He had maneuvered to get a flank shot where his 76mm gun was effective, and his crew had executed perfectly. The American column resumed its advance, now with Poole's tank in the lead, having earned the spearhead position through demonstrated capability rather than assigned duty. On August 7, 1944, the Falaise Gap battle represented one of the most significant engagements of the Normandy campaign. Allied forces were attempting to encircle and destroy the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, trapping them in a pocket near the town of Falaise. If successful, the encirclement would destroy the primary German forces in Normandy, opening the way for a rapid advance across France to the German border. The operation required American forces advancing north from the south to link up with British and Canadian forces advancing south from the north, closing the gap and trapping the Germans inside. Poole's tank led Task Force Y of Combat Command during the closing of the pocket, with Lieutenant Colonel Richardson monitoring the radio from his command position. The fighting was chaotic and desperate. German units attempted to break out of the encirclement, attacking American positions with everything they had. Other German units, already west of the pocket, attempted to break through American lines from the outside to create an escape route for their trapped comrades. The result was a massive, confused battle with units from both sides intermixed, fighting meeting engagements and ambushes in the Norman countryside. As Poole's column advanced, they encountered groups of German soldiers attempting to escape on foot, having abandoned their vehicles and heavy weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Richardson listened on the radio as Poole closed with a group of fleeing German troops. Poole's voice came over the radio. "Ain't got the heart to kill 'em." The humanitarian impulse was real and reflected Poole's character despite his aggressive reputation. German soldiers attempting to flee on foot represented no immediate threat to Poole's mission. But Richardson knew that Poole understood the tactical situation. Immediately following came the sound of Close's .30 caliber bow machine gun opening fire. Richardson heard Poole's voice again. "Watch the bastards run. Get them close." The humanitarian impulse lasted only a moment before tactical necessity prevailed. German soldiers fleeing in disorder still represented a threat if allowed to escape, regroup, and reorganize. They would be issued new weapons and return to combat. More Americans would die fighting them later if Poole allowed them to escape now. Poole's job was to destroy the enemy's capacity to resist, and he executed that mission without hesitation despite his personal feelings. The incident illustrated the moral complexity of combat, where good men must do terrible things in service of necessary missions. From August 29th to 31st, 1944, Poole commanded the lead tank in an attack that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest decoration for valor. The citation, approved by division headquarters and signed by senior commanders, described Poole's actions in detail. Poole was advancing alone ahead of his task force, having outdistanced supporting tanks in his aggressive push forward. Enemy contact was expected, but Poole's exact location and the enemy dispositions were unclear in the fluid combat situation. Over the course of 3 days, advancing often alone or with only 1 or 2 other tanks, Poole's crew engaged and destroyed 4 German tanks in separate encounters. The first was a Mark IV destroyed from ambush as it attempted to cross a road. The second was a Sturmgeschütz assault gun destroyed at close range after a brief running fight through a village. The third and fourth were Panthers destroyed in a single engagement where Poole's tank came under fire from both vehicles simultaneously and destroyed both through superior shooting and crew discipline. In addition to the tanks, Poole's crew destroyed 3 anti-tank guns that had been positioned to ambush American armor, approximately 50 unarmored vehicles, including half-tracks, trucks, and cars, and killed or wounded an overwhelming number of enemy personnel. The citation noted that Poole's unflinching courage and inspired leadership in the face of devastating hostile fire permitted the rapid advance of his task force with minimum casualties. His extraordinary heroism, personal bravery, and zealous devotion to duty exemplified the highest traditions of the military forces. The award citation understated the danger of what Poole had accomplished. Advancing alone or with minimal support, Poole had deliberately placed himself in the most dangerous position to draw enemy fire and identify enemy positions. Every anti-tank gun he destroyed had gotten off at least 1 shot at his tank before he killed it. Every German tank he engaged was theoretically capable of destroying his Sherman before he could destroy it. Poole survived through a combination of skill, aggression, crew training, and extraordinary luck. The Distinguished Service Cross recognized his actions, though many who witnessed them believed he deserved the Medal of Honor. Over those 3 days in late August, Poole demonstrated that aggressive action, superior tactics, and excellent crew work could overcome numerical and technical disadvantages. The Sherman was inferior to German medium and heavy tanks in armor and firepower, but Poole proved conclusively that the tank with the better crew won the engagement, not the tank with the thicker armor or bigger gun. His example inspired other tank commanders throughout the division to fight more aggressively, to take calculated risks, to close with the enemy rather than engaging from standoff distances where German technical superiority was decisive. On August 17, 1944, at Frohen, France, Combat Command A was clearing remaining German forces from the village during the exploitation across France. The war had become a pursuit, with German forces retreating toward Germany's borders and American armor racing to catch and destroy them before they could establish new defensive lines. Poole's tank was leading the attack into Frohen when disaster struck from an unexpected direction. American P-38 Lightning fighter bombers appeared overhead, hunting for German armor. The P-38 was a distinctive aircraft with twin engines and a central crew nacelle, easily recognizable and usually a welcome sight for American ground forces. The P-38s provided close air support, attacked German convoys, and helped American units by spotting enemy positions and calling in artillery. But on this day, the P-38 pilots made a fatal mistake. From the air, at several thousand feet, all tanks looked similar. The distinctive profiles that allowed ground observers to identify friend from foe were much harder to distinguish from above. The P-38 pilots saw tanks advancing through a French village and assumed they were German. The lead pilot called out the target and began his attack run, followed by his wingmen. The P-38s carried rockets, devastating weapons effective against armor when fired from diving attacks. Poole saw the aircraft diving toward his position and immediately recognized the danger. He grabbed the radio handset, calling frantically to identify his unit as friendly American forces. But the P-38s were already committed to their attack. The first aircraft fired a salvo of rockets. The projectiles streaked down toward In the Mood, trailing smoke. Poole had no time to react, no way to evade. The rockets impacted around and on the Sherman with devastating effect. One rocket struck the turret. Another hit the engine compartment. Explosions erupted across the tank. Poole gave the immediate order to abandon the vehicle. The crew bailed out with practiced efficiency, scrambling from hatches as fire and smoke engulfed the Sherman. All 5 men escaped, though several suffered minor injuries from the explosions and the desperate exit from the burning tank. They ran clear of the vehicle seconds before ammunition began cooking off, sending flames and secondary explosions shooting skyward. In the Mood, the second Sherman to bear that name, was destroyed not by German forces but by friendly fire from their own air support. The incident devastated Poole and his crew. They had survived nearly 2 months of intense combat against German forces, had destroyed dozens of enemy vehicles, had fought their way across France, only to lose their tank to American aircraft. The P-38 pilots, upon learning of their mistake, were reportedly distraught. Friendly fire incidents were one of the tragic realities of modern warfare, where fast-moving operations and split-second decisions sometimes led to catastrophic errors. But understanding the cause did nothing to lessen the impact on Poole's crew. For the second time in less than 2 months, Poole and his crew found themselves without a tank. They had survived 2 complete losses of their vehicle, first to a German Panzerfaust, now to American rockets. The odds of surviving even 1 tank loss were poor. Surviving 2 seemed almost miraculous. But Poole's luck wasn't exhausted. Within days, he and his crew received their 3rd Sherman, another M4A1 76W with a 76mm gun. Once again, Poole had In the Mood painted on the hull. The tradition continued. The name had become synonymous with Poole's tank, recognized throughout the 3rd Armored Division as belonging to the crew that led every attack, that destroyed more enemy vehicles than any other crew, that seemed to bear a charmed life despite constant exposure to danger. The 3rd In the Mood would carry Poole and his crew through another month of combat, through the advance to the German border, through the penetration of the Siegfried Line, to the final battle that would end Poole's war. In September 1944, the 3rd Armored Division advanced rapidly across France and into Belgium, pursuing German forces that were attempting to retreat to the Siegfried Line, Germany's defensive fortifications along its western border. The Siegfried Line, known to the Germans as the West Wall, consisted of bunkers, tank obstacles, and minefields stretching for hundreds of miles. Built in the 1930s as a defensive line against France, the fortifications had been neglected during Germany's years of offensive victories. Now, with Allied forces approaching German soil, the Wehrmacht was desperately trying to man the Siegfried Line and prepare it to delay the Allied advance. The race to reach the Siegfried Line before German forces could fully occupy and prepare its defenses became a critical objective. If Allied forces could penetrate the line while German defenses were still disorganized, they might be able to push into Germany itself before winter halted operations. But if the Germans successfully manned the Siegfried Line with sufficient forces, the Allies would face months of costly fighting to breach the fortifications. Poole's tank continued to lead attacks during this pursuit phase. His crew's tally of destroyed enemy vehicles climbed steadily. By early September, Poole had personally accounted for the destruction of over 250 enemy vehicles, including at least 12 confirmed tank kills. The exact number of German soldiers killed by Poole's crew exceeded 1,000, though the chaos of combat made precise counts impossible. Poole's crew had also captured approximately 250 German prisoners, often entire units that surrendered when faced with the aggressive American tank that seemed to appear everywhere at once. Poole's reputation had grown to legendary status within the 3rd Armored Division. Other tank commanders studied his tactics, trying to understand how he achieved such remarkable success. Infantry units requested Poole's tank for support during difficult attacks, knowing that Wardaddy would lead the way forward regardless of enemy resistance. Division headquarters recognized Poole's value, both as a combat leader and as an inspiration to other tankers. But they also recognized that Poole's aggressive tactics and constant exposure to danger made his survival increasingly unlikely. The law of averages suggested that even the best tanker's luck would eventually run out. In mid-September, division headquarters made a decision. Poole and his crew would be sent home to the United States for a war bonds tour. They had earned a respite. They had survived 3 tank losses, had fought in 21 major attacks, had compiled a combat record unmatched by any other American tank crew. Their story would inspire Americans at home, would help sell war bonds to fund the continued war effort, and would give these exceptional soldiers a well-deserved break from combat. The orders were cut. Poole and his crew would complete one final mission. Then they would be withdrawn from the front lines and sent to the rear for processing and transport home. On September 19, 1944, at Münsterbusch, Germany, the final mission began in darkness. The 3rd Armored Division's Combat Command, it was tasked with advancing toward Aachen, Germany's first major city, to face Allied attack. The approach to Aachen required clearing the small towns and villages that protected the city's western approaches. Münsterbusch was one such village, located approximately 6 miles from Aachen proper, a small collection of buildings and farms that German forces had turned into a defensive strongpoint. Poole's orders for this final day were specific and protective. Do not spearhead, stay on the flank. The mission was simple: provide support for other units conducting the main attack, but avoid the most dangerous positions. Division headquarters wanted Poole and his crew to survive this last mission before being sent home. Poole understood the orders, but his nature and 3 months of combat experience told him that no position in a tank battle was truly safe. The attack began at first light. American tanks advanced in a coordinated assault with infantry moving alongside to clear buildings and suppress anti-tank weapons. German resistance was immediate and fierce. The approaches to Aachen were vital to German defense, and every yard would be contested. Artillery fire crashed down on both sides. Mortar rounds exploded among the advancing American forces. The distinctive crack of German 88mm guns announced the presence of anti-tank weapons, and Shermans began burning. Poole's tank moved forward on the flank as ordered, providing covering fire for the main attack. The crew worked with the efficiency born of 3 months of combat. Aller scanned for targets through his gun sight. Boggs stood ready with ammunition. Richards maneuvered the Sherman to firing positions that Poole identified. Close watched the flanks with his bow machine gun. Poole stood in the commander's position, exposed as always, directing his crew's fire and monitoring the radio for updates on the battle's progress. However, Willis Aller was not in the tank on this morning. Aller had been temporarily transferred back to the United States, part of the routine rotation of combat veterans that the Army used to provide experienced soldiers a respite from combat and to use their experience for training purposes. In Aller's place, manning the main gun for this final battle, was Private First Class Paul Kenneth King, a 20-year-old gunner from Anderson County, Tennessee. King was experienced and capable, but he lacked Aller's 3 months of combat experience with Poole's crew. The synchronization that Poole's original crew had developed through dozens of battles was slightly diminished, though King was doing his best to match the crew's exceptional standards. The attack progressed into Münsterbusch itself. Buildings provided concealment for German defenders. Every window, every doorway, every pile of rubble could hide a Panzerfaust team or machine gun nest. The fighting became close-range and brutal. Tanks fired high-explosive rounds into buildings suspected of harboring enemy forces. Infantry cleared houses room by room. German soldiers fought back desperately, knowing they were defending German soil now, not occupied territory. Poole's tank reached a street intersection in Münsterbusch. The position offered good fields of fire down multiple streets, allowing Poole to support the main attack while maintaining a relatively protected position. For a brief moment, the situation seemed under control. American forces were advancing. German resistance, while fierce, was being overcome. Poole might actually survive this final mission and make a home. Then disaster struck with the sudden violence that characterized tank combat. A German Panther tank, concealed in a protected position that offered excellent fields of fire, opened up on the American armor. The Panther's commander had positioned his tank carefully, waiting for American Shermans to enter his killing zone. He had identified Poole's tank as a priority target, perhaps recognizing the in the mood markings, perhaps simply choosing the nearest American tank, perhaps following the tactical principle of engaging the most dangerous enemy first. The Panther's 75mm KWK 42 gun fired twice in rapid succession. Both rounds were aimed with deadly precision at in the mood. The first armor-piercing round struck the Sherman's turret, penetrating the armor and exploding inside the crew compartment. The second round hit almost simultaneously, striking the hull and causing catastrophic damage to the tank's internal systems. The explosions inside the turret killed Private First Class Paul Kenneth King instantly. The young gunner from Tennessee, filling in for Aller on what was supposed to be a safer mission, died in the flash of superheated metal and explosive force. He never had a chance to react, never knew what hit him. Poole, standing in the commander's position, was struck by shrapnel and blast effects from the penetrating rounds. Metal fragments tore into his right leg, causing massive trauma. The concussion from the explosions inside the confined turret space stunned him. But some instinct, some survival reflex developed through months of combat, drove him to give the order to bail out. The surviving crew members scrambled from the dying tank. Richards and Close exited through their hull hatches, Richards overcoming his fear of being trapped to escape through the driver's position. Boggs squeezed through the loader's hatch despite injuries from the explosions. Poole attempted to climb out through the commander's hatch, but his shattered right leg wouldn't support his weight. He struggled, fighting against shock and pain and the knowledge that the tank might explode at any moment. Then the Sherman, already catastrophically damaged, tipped forward into a large shell crater. The forward motion threw Poole partially out of the turret, but also trapped him against the hatch rim. His crew, already clear of the tank, turned back despite the danger to help their commander. They pulled Poole free from the hatch and dragged him away from, in the mood, as ammunition began cooking off inside the hull. They had perhaps seconds to spare. Poole was conscious but in shock from his injuries. His right leg was mangled beyond repair, shattered by shrapnel and blast effects. Blood loss was severe. The crew called for medics while providing what first aid they could with the limited supplies available in combat. Medics arrived within minutes, stabilizing Poole and preparing him for evacuation to the rear. The crew watched as their commander was loaded onto a jeep and driven away toward a field hospital. They had survived 3 tank losses together, had fought through 83 days of continuous combat, had destroyed 258 enemy vehicles, and killed over 1,000 German soldiers. But Paul Kenneth King was dead, and Wardaddy's war was over. Poole was evacuated through the medical system, moving from a field hospital to a base hospital and eventually to a hospital in the United States. The damage to his right leg was too severe to repair. Surgeons amputated the leg 8 inches above the knee, removing the shattered bone and torn tissue in an operation that saved Poole's life but ended his career as a tank commander. The recovery was long and painful. Poole endured multiple surgeries, fought through infections, learned to walk again with a prosthetic leg. But he was alive. The final statistics of Poole's combat service were unprecedented in American military history. In 83 days of combat from June 29th to September 19th, 1944, Poole and his crew destroyed 258 enemy armored vehicles, including 12 confirmed tank kills. They killed or wounded over 1,000 German soldiers. They captured approximately 250 prisoners. They led 21 major attacks, always spearheading, always in the most dangerous position. Poole survived 3 complete losses of his tank, first to a Panzerfaust, then to friendly fire, finally to a German Panther. His crew survived with him through the first 2 losses, but Paul Kenneth King paid the ultimate price in the final battle. Poole was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions from August 29th to 31st, 1944. He received the Legion of Merit for his exceptional service throughout the campaign. The Silver Star was awarded for specific acts of valor. The Purple Heart recognized his wounds. The Belgian Forager honored his contributions to the liberation of Belgium. Years later, in recognition of his entire military career, France would award Poole the Legion of Honor with the grade of Chevalier. Poole was twice nominated for the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The first nomination's paperwork was reportedly lost in the chaotic final months of the war in Europe. The second nomination was reviewed by the Army Recommendation Board, but ultimately rejected. The official rationale stated that tanks were crew-served weapons, and therefore individual heroism in tank combat did not merit the Medal of Honor. This reasoning reflected an infantry-centric mentality in the Army's award system that failed to recognize the reality of armored combat, where the tank commander's decisions, leadership, and tactical skill were decisive factors in success or failure. Many who served with Poole believed the rejection was a grave injustice. Poole's actions, repeated over 83 days of combat, demonstrated heroism and leadership that exceeded the standards for the Medal of Honor. But the decision stood.